Thank you. And as to no comment by an FBI, that's usually what they say when there's an ongoing investigation, particularly when it's a couple of days before an election. But why are we here? Why? You know, that's been the question that quite a number of people have been asking me.
This is a question many people are asking. What is the purpose of this meeting? With the economy and rising prices worrying millions of citizens, it becomes especially important to understand why the focus is on discussing freedom of speech rather than more pressing issues.
Why are you having this hearing? What does this have to do with inflation? What does this have to do with the cost of living? What does this have to do with the everyday lives of Americans, the thing that the Republican Party said that they would focus on if they had control of the House? Why would the Republican leadership and the committee majority give a hearing and a platform to the witnesses today, specifically to Mr. Kennedy?
It is curious why this particular witness was chosen for discussion. Perhaps it is his ability to draw attention to complex and controversial issues. However, this choice raises an important question. Does this discussion serve the interests of a wide audience and contribute to a deeper understanding of the issues raised?
A man who has recently claimed that COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and Black people. The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese. And before that, in his film, Medical Racism, The New Apartheid, that film stated that COVID-19 vaccines do not work for Black children because of their, quote, kick-ass kind of immune system, that hyper, superhuman, subhuman kind of language. He also said, even in Hitler's Germany, you could cross the Alps to Switzerland. You could hide in an attic like Anne Frank did, to imply Jews in Nazi Germany had more freedoms than unvaccinated Americans during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, many of my Republican colleagues across the dais will rush to cover that they have Mr. Kennedy here because they want to protect his free speech.
Freedom of speech is the foundation of democracy. However, it also implies responsibility for how and for what the platform provided is used. This balance is important for maintaining public trust.
That they do not believe in American censorship. This is not the kind of free speech that I know of. The free speech that is protected by the Constitution's First Amendment. But free speech is not an absolute. The Supreme Court has stated that.
This is an important reminder that free speech has its limits, especially when it comes to protecting the public from misinformation or other threats. It is the balance between free speech and public responsibility that is the key issue in such discussions.
And others' free speech that is allowed, hateful, abusive rhetoric, does not need to be promoted in the halls of the people's house. This Republican charge of free speech is being used by Republican members to promote quasi-science, things such as the replacement theory that says that brown people are replacing good white Americans here in this country. Let's not remember that this country first belonged to brown Native American people. It's a rallying cry for bigotry and hate. There are members of the Republican conference who also frequently suggest that Americans have to deal with COVID rules as the same as oppression of Nazi Germany. Indeed, some have even questioned whether the Holocaust took place. We have staffers who openly follow white supremacy without any condemnation of the Republican conference. Some give it chuckles, slaps on the back, shrugs, all under the mantra of free speech. It's a free country. You absolutely have a right to say what you believe, but you don't have the right to a platform, public or private. We don't have to give one of the largest platforms of our democracy, Congress, this hearing. Our right does not mean that we as Americans are not free from accountability.
Mr. Kennedy, you are now recognized for your opening statement.
Let's hear another presentation that has already generated so much discussion. I wonder to what extent what we hear will help to shed light on controversial points and give a fuller picture of the issue at hand.
And then we'll go right down the line. He's going to go a little longer.
Excuse me, point of order. I know that witnesses usually have 5 minutes. I see 10 minutes on the board. Is it going to be 10 minutes
We'll
for
give him
every
5
witness?
minutes, but we're pretty lax with this. We'll let him go for
We
a
are?
little, yeah.
I've seen you gavel down on quite a number of
We've
witnesses.
given senators and former Democrat members of Congress and all kinds
He's
of folks plenty
neither.
of time.
He's
I know.
neither.
I'm just saying in past history.
Okay,
in
okay.
committee. But
Let's just
we'll
watch
you,
the time for all the witnesses.
and if
then.
you want to cut him off and censor him some more, you're welcome to do it.
Oh, that's not my job. That's your job. Why don't you threaten a witness so that they can not want to be a
Mr.
witness?
Kennedy is recognized for his opening statement. We'll give him 5 minutes, more or less, and then we'll move to the next one. Mr. Kennedy, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, maybe we could put 5 minutes on the clock then, not 10.
Could we put 5 on the clock and we'll start it running?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to put aside my written statement for a moment and address one of the points that was brought up, I think an important point by the ranking member, that this body ought to be concerning itself with issues that impact directly the American people. The rising price of groceries, 76% over the past 2 years for basic foodstuff, the war in Ukraine, the inflation issues, the border issues, many, many other issues that concern us all as a nation. We can't do that without the First Amendment, without debate. When I gave my speech, my announcement speech in Boston 2 months ago, YouTube, I talked about all those issues. I focused on grocery. I focused on the fact that working class people can no longer afford to live in this country. I talked about inflation, all the issues that deeply concern you and that you've devoted your career to alleviating those issues. 5 minutes into my speech, when I was talking about Paul Revere, YouTube deplatformed me. I didn't talk about vaccines in that speech.
Mr. Kennedy touches on the issue of content moderation. It's a hot topic as platforms are forced to find a balance between freedom of expression and protection from potentially harmful information.
I didn't talk about anything that was a verboten subject. I just was talking about my campaign and things, the conversation that we ought to be having with each other as Americans. But I was shut down, and that is why the First Amendment's important. Debate, congenial, respectful debate is the fertilizer, it's the water, it's the sunlight for our democracy. We need to be talking to each other. Now, this is a letter that many of you signed, many of my fellow Democrats. I've spent my life in this party. I've devoted my life to the values of this party. 102 people signed this. This itself is evidence of the problem that this hearing was convened to address. This is an attempt to censor a censorship hearing. The charges in this, and by the way, censorship is antithetical to our party. It was appalling to my father, to my uncle, to FDR, to Harry Truman, to Thomas Jefferson, as the chairman referred to. It is the basis for democracy. It sets us apart from all of the previous forms of government. We need to be able to talk, and the First Amendment was not written for easy speech. It was written for the speech that nobody likes you for. And I was censored not just by the Democratic administration, I was censored by the Trump administration. I was the first person censored by as the chairman pointed out, by the Biden administration 2 days after it came into office. It ordered a truthful, and by the way, they had to invent a new word called malinformation to censor people like me. There was no misinformation on my Instagram account. Everything I put on that account was cited and sourced to peer-reviewed publications or government databases. Nobody has ever pointed to a single piece of misinformation that I publish. I was removed for something they called malinformation. Malinformation is information that is true, but is inconvenient to the government.
The term malinformation raises an important question. How can information consistent with facts be perceived as a threat? This discussion is not only about freedom of speech, but also about the interpretation of data in modern society.
That they don't want people to hear. And that's antithetical to the values of our country. After I announced my presidency, it became more difficult for people to censor me outright. So now I'm subject to this new form of censorship, which is called targeted propaganda, where people apply pejoratives like anti-vax. I've never been anti-vaccine, but everybody in this room probably believes that I have been, because that's the prevailing narrative. Anti-Semitism, racism, these are the most appalling, disgusting pejoratives, and they're applied to me to silence me, because people don't want me to have that conversation about the war, about groceries, about inflation, about the war on the middle class in this country that we need to be having. And by the way, I want to say this while I'm on the record, that in my entire life, and why I'm under oath, in my entire life, I have never uttered a phrase that was either racist or anti-Semitic. I have spent my life fighting my professional career, fighting for Israel, for the protection of Israel. I have a better record on Israel than anybody in this chamber today. I'm the only person who has publicly objected to the $2 billion payout that the Biden administration is now making to Iran, which is a genocidal program. I'm the only one who's objected to that. I've fought more ferociously for Israel than anybody. But I am being censored here through this target, through smears, through misinterpretations of what I've said, through lies, through association, which is a tactic that we all thought we had been discredited and dispensed with after the Army McCarthy hearings in the 1950s. But those same weapons are now being deployed against me to silence me. I know many of the people who wrote this letter. I don't believe there's a single person who signed this letter who believes I'm anti-Semitic. I do not believe that. There is no evidence of that. Now, I want to say something I think that's more important, and it goes directly to what you talked about, ranking member, which is the need, this toxic polarization that is destroying our country today.
Polarization is a challenge for any society. It is important to understand how constructive dialogue can help reduce tensions and strengthen social cohesion.
And how do we deal with that? This kind of division is more dangerous for our country than any time since the American Civil War. And how do we deal with that? How are we going to, every Democrat on this committee believes that we need to end that polarization. Do you think you can do that by censoring people? I'm telling you, you cannot. That only aggravates and amplifies the problem. We need to start being kind to each other. We need to start being respectful to each other. We need to start restoring the comedy to this chamber and to the rest of America, but it has to start here. My uncle, Edward Kennedy, has more legislation with his name on it than any senator in United States history. Why is that? Because he was able to reach across the aisle, because he didn't deal in insults, because he didn't try to censor people. He brought home people who were antithetical to what he believed in. He came home almost every weekend with people like Orrin Hatch to our house at the compound in Hyannisport. At that time, Orrin Hatch to me was like Darth Vader, because I was an environmentalist. And I was saying, why is Teddy bringing this guy home? But he knew that he was effective because he understood that comedy and respect and kindness and compassion and empathy for other people is the only way to restore the function in this chamber. But more importantly, today we need to give an example in the leadership of our country of being respectful to each other. If you think I said something that's anti-Semitic, let's talk about the details.
Discussing complex issues requires accuracy and respect. Context plays a key role, and it is important to avoid interpretations that may cause misunderstanding or offense.
I'm telling you all the things that I'm accused of right now by you. And in this letter are distortions, they're misrepresentations. I didn't say those things. There's fragments that I said, but I denounce anybody who uses the words that I have said to imply something that is negative about people who are Jewish. I never said those things. And I want to point out also that the chairman pointed to Dennis Kucinich, who's fighting behind me. There is no two people in the country who feel more differently about American politics than these two people. And yet they were friends. Dennis attended his children's basketball games, attended his daughter's wedding. This is what we need, how we need to start treating each other in this country. We have to stop trying to destroy each other, to marginalize, to vilify.
The call for respect and mutual understanding is particularly relevant. It is important to seek ways for dialogue that will help find common solutions and strengthen society.
Gaslight each other. We have to find that place inside of ourselves of light, of empathy, of compassion, and above all, we need to elevate the Constitution of the United States, which was written for hard times. And that has to be the premier compass for all of our activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes. And I think we'll do ranking member and one more, and then we'll have to take a break.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that we talked earlier about a post that Mr. Kennedy had at the beginning of the Biden administration. I just want the record to reflect that that post has not been taken down. So I'm wondering about the extent of censorship when the post is still there. But more importantly, again, I go back to just the fact that we are creating a platform for this kind of discussion, not about the censorship, not about free speech, but the content of some of that speech that we are amplifying in this room. I'm appalled and just so troubled by colleagues that I have to work with, that these are individuals who would bring a witness who's promoted a video that compared the COVID vaccine to the Tuskegee trials. The Tuskegee trials were a very difficult time in Black America, where individuals who were already sick with a disease were then reviewed, experimented on, who already had a disease to see how far that disease went. And making the comparison that manipulates and preys on Black people's feelings about the atrocities of the past in order to prevent them from seeking life-saving vaccines in the present. And knowing that this is dangerous, I cannot also be unaware that this comes from an individual who, by Mr. Roy's introduction, is very smart and understands the implications of this. You know, Mr. Kennedy's own family decries his stance on vaccines, and families disagree on a lot of things. I got family members that, we all disagree, so that doesn't mean anything. But the fact that he has famously sent a request to a party guest that they had to be vaccinated to come to his party. And I'd like to introduce into the record a letter from Louis Silkin, a law firm representing Mr. Kennedy, which states, as he has stated repeatedly, he vaccinated all his children, and I'd like that to be introduced into the record, but tells the Black community and myself, a mother of 5 Black children, that I should really be careful and not necessarily have the same safeguards to protect my family, my children, from a virus that has killed millions of people because I'm Black. There's no secret that this is an amplification of his own platform. You know, I'm not going to talk about the money that's received from the Children's Health Defense, from his anti-vaccine organization that's responsible for a majority of the false information out there about COVID, and the notoriety that's gained from it by manipulating Black and other vulnerable communities to propagate these pseudosciences.
The gentleman from North Dakota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to yield my time to Representative Massey.
I thank the gentleman from North Dakota. Wow, the irony and cognitive dissonance from the other side of the aisle, it's deafening. You could cut it with a knife. They are at the same time denying that censorship is occurring, but suggesting that there's more material that needs to be censored. This is a hearing on censorship that began with an effort, with a formal motion from the other side of the aisle to censor Mr. Kennedy. They do not want him to speak, yet that is the topic of this hearing. They have kept him from speaking. A collusion between the government and private organizations. Mr. Kennedy, in your opening statement, you introduced us to this word malinformation. Can you tell us more about this made-up word, what it means, and some of the things that you've said or tried to say that you've been censored for that's been characterized as malinformation?
Yes, Congressman Massey, and if by your leave, I'd like to just respond very briefly to some of the, what I would call defamations that have been just applied to me by the ranking member. I'm happy to talk to you about my opinions on these issues. What you have stated and tried to associate me with through guilt by association is simply inaccurate. Virtually everything, every statement that you just made about me is inaccurate. I have never advised Black Americans not to receive vaccines. At one point you say I'm anti-vax, and that's a bad thing. The other moment you point out that all my children are vax. I'm fully compliant with the vaccine schedule myself, except for COVID. I took flu vaccines for 20 years straight. I have never been anti-vax. I have never told the public avoid vaccination. The only thing I've asked for, and my views are constantly misrepresented so that the truth of what I believe is not, we're not allowed to have a conversation about that with the American people, which I believe vaccines should be tested with the same rigor as other medicines and medications. You tried to associate me a moment ago with the replacement theory, which is racist.
No, I did not say you
Time
had the
belongs to the
replacement
gentleman
theory.
from
I
the
said my
second-
colleagues.
The time belongs to the gentleman from
I
Kentucky.
denounce that theory. It is racist, and I have never endorsed it or had any association with it. Our film on a medical, by the way,
medical apartheid?
Bill Buxton, who is the Black CDC official who ultimately exposed the Tuskegee experiment, tried for years and years to appeal to CDC to stop it for 40 years. Finally, he got relief by walking into my uncle's office in the building next door. He held hearings and ended the experiment. I remember that very well. And to say that I created a film that encourages Blacks not to get adequate medical care is just completely abhorrent.
Don't misuse my words,
It's the
sir.
witness's time. Do not censor the witness.
I'm
If
not
the-
censoring
if
the
the-
witness.
Yeah.
I'm not
If the-
censoring the witness. He's still talking.
It's
I don't
my
have the
time, and I've
ability to
given it to the
censor.
witness. Do not censor him.
I'm not
the-
censoring him.
If the views that you and others have applied to me, I've attributed to me, if they were actually true, I can see why I shouldn't be able to testify here today. Those are not true. These are defamations and malignancies that are used to censor me, to prevent people from listening to the actual things that I'm saying. And I think, ranking member, that we should have a real conversation rather than an exchange of ad hominem attacks.
Mr. Kennedy's and others here are claiming that they've been censored, but they actually have a huge megaphone. The rules that my colleague tried to bring up were rules that the Republicans made at the beginning of this Congress. They did not allow the Democrats to be part of that. And one of those rules was that if information or testimony might potentially defame an individual, that we would go in executive session. No one was trying to stop him from testifying, but not to give him the megaphone that this group has allowed him to have. I also note, in terms of censorship, that the far-right media has already issued articles about me playing the race card. The race card is something that's often used against Black people for bringing up when they see race hatred being propagated against them. And it's a means to try and keep us quiet and keep us in our place. Oh, you're playing the race card by bringing up what is obvious in our lives, what is obviously happening, race. And so you can keep saying I'm race baiting and try and censor me, but I'm going to continue to tell the truth. I want to be abundantly clear about what else is happening in this room. The MAGA Republicans are trying to scare social media companies into not taking down blatantly false information in the lead up to our 2024 presidential election. Chair Jordan knows, as we do, that when conspiracy theories succeed, so does Donald Trump. Russia interfered in our 2016 election, they attempted in our 2020, and they're going to try to interfere in the 2024 presidential election. We note that Russian trolls sought to suppress the Black vote by unleashing a torrent of social media posts designed to stoke racial tensions and spread incorrect voting information. In 2021, our national intelligence agencies found that proactive information sharing between the government and social media companies facilitated the expeditious review and, in many cases, removal of social media accounts covertly operated by Russia and Iran. Ms. Wiley, if the government is not able to proactively share information with social media companies in 2024, what is likely to have be the ramifications? And I'd ask that you make your answer as succinct as possible because there's a lot of information I need.
I will just quote one thing. Mr. Prigozhin, who's been in the news of late, actually said explicitly and openly that they would continue to try to spread mis and disinformation into the United States and interfere with our elections.
Thank you. They know that Russian interference, that is, the MAGA Republicans know that Trump benefits when Russia interferes. The super PAC that supports, the same super PAC that supports Mr. Kennedy and has raised significant funds on his behalf is run by a man named Jason Bowles. Here's Jason Bowles' Twitter profile, as you can see up on the screen. Jason Bowles isn't just a MAGA supporter, he also ran the super PAC for MAGA Republicans Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, George Santos, and in 2022, he supported Herschel Walker. So the person behind Mr. Kennedy's super PAC is an individual who personally and professionally wants the Republican Party to succeed. Yet, Mr. Kennedy is running as a Democrat. Ms. Wiley, will it benefit Mr. Kennedy as well as the other individuals that are supported by the super PAC if social media companies are less able to detect and, if needed, if they determine that it's needed, to remove Russian covert information designed to suppress votes in this country?
It is possible.
Thank you. I yield back.
Can I yield the remainder of the time?
Gentlelady yields back. I now recognize Mr. Stubbe from Florida for his 5 minutes.
Mr. Kennedy, you want to respond to that? Can you do that quickly?
Yeah, I've never heard of Mr. Bowles, and I've never heard of that super PAC. This is typical of the accusations against me at this hearing. They are baseless. Every single one I've been subjected to a parade of defamations. If I believe those things about myself, I wouldn't want to hear me either and want to gag me and lock me in a room somewhere. But none of those are true, and they were all of this parade of accusations and defamations were made against me in a way that was calculated to make sure that I could not respond to any of them. Every one of them I'd like to respond to, but I was not allowed to.
I did want to ask Ms. Wiley regarding, we had a discussion and it was brought up by one of the witnesses related to the website Gab. And if you could tell us, it seems to me that while Mr. Kennedy is here, he claims to have been censored, but in reality, his group Children's Health Defense has been allowed to say whatever they want on Gab. Can you share what Gab is?
Gab is a online community that it explicitly states that it wants to create a Christian political economy, and it is a space where researchers have identified a massive influx of extremist and also explicitly anti-Semitic engagement and behavior. Not saying that's about everyone who participates, but that has been documented. And as I stated earlier, the murderer, convicted murderer in the Tree of Life massacre actually spent a lot of time on that, and it was deplatformed because it was not adhering to some of the social media policies about identifying that kind of speech.
Thank you. I yield back.
I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. We appreciate the work you're doing to defend the First Amendment, and thank you for just very compelling answers and compelling testimony and the work you've done and how important this is for the country. I mean, if we don't have a First Amendment, it's just, I'm frightened by where we go.
May I, Mr. Chairman?
You may not, you may not.
I just
Mr.
want to
Chair.
respond.
Mr. Chair, the time is out, we're done.
I haven't adjourned the hearing, and I don't think you're the chair.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair,
Chairman's discretion.
I
We're gonna
know
let
it's
Mr.
your
Kennedy-
discretion,
We're going to
but
let Mr. Kennedy.
he has had so much additional time.
Well, I think everyone's had
Why?
additional time. and we're gonna
Why?
get-
Why are you doing that specifically for him?
Because
I
we
just
don't
want
believe.
to
opposed to other
explain
people.
I'm sure the witness.
super PAC.
I'm sure the
On
Democrat
other
witness will be
places.
as short as he possibly can.
No. Are you going to allow our witness to just give another piece?
No, let him address
I
the
wanna
defamatory
acknowledge-
comment that was made
Address-
about him that's untrue.
That was not defamatory. That is a legal definition that was not met.
I want to acknowledge
And was it my-
information about the super PAC that you mentioned.
Go ahead.
I've just been told that that super PAC is connected to somebody that we have a connection to. It's not a super PAC that I've endorsed, and it's not one, as I said, that I've ever heard of.
Thank the gentleman.